and then I started playing with it, kind of as a hobby. But when Ethereum was my moment where I realized this is now a story that is 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 times bigger, and I need to drop everything else and just do this.
Hey friends, welcome to Smart Venture Podcast, the best information for future CEOs. Starting a company is easy, but growing and managing it is hard. In this podcast, we sit down with the best founders, experienced leaders, and investors in tech and relevant space to give you the best tips to grow your company and grow yourself. Some of our most popular episodes are about crypto founders and investors. Check out our new podcast called Keeping Up with Crypto on YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify. If you like it, don't forget to subscribe and give it a 5-star. This episode is brought to you by Momento NFT. Momento NFT is a direct-to-fan social NFT app that allows fans to own viral moments from their favorite creators and unlock perks like meet and greets, autographed merchandise, and more. As a creator, you can easily create valuable images and video NFTs of your best social content. And as a fan, you can own viral moments from your favorite creators and unlock perks like meet and greets. Momento NFT is backed by Animoca brand, Benza and Mark Pincus. Check out the app available on App Store and Google Play. Hi, Matthew. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Hi, pleased to be here. Thanks for having me.
When it comes to crypto, who do you consider as your personal board of advisors when you're shaping your career moves?
That's a great question. The best answer is that I've never really had one, actually. I've always just kind of followed my own instincts, but I don't really recommend that. I think that's a tough road. I don't think it's a good idea for most people. It's probably not even a good idea for me. But for myself, I have always just kind of followed my own instincts and counsel.
What kind of skill do you think you're constantly trying to get better at when it comes to investing in crypto, as well as having both backgrounds internationally?
There's a wide array of skills that are super important for venture investing. I think for me, I spend a lot of time on building out the relationship networks. VC is fundamentally a relationship business. It's an information hedge fund trading is an information business. VC is an information, but really even more than that, a relationship business. Even more than that, I want to be spending as much of my own personal time with portfolio companies as possible. That's how I try to be extremely stingy with my time in most circumstances so that I can spend almost all of my time with portfolio companies, basically. Actually, the Sino team handles most initial investment calls. And if it already seems like something where there's a reasonable chance that we will be interested in it, then at that time, I join in a follow-up call. Because we're taking dozens of calls every day with potential investments. So basically, the Sino team will take the first calls in most situations. So they probably take 50 calls a week across the team. And then out of those 50 calls, 5 to 10, maybe 10, there'll be a follow-up call. I'll join the follow-up call. So I think that what I'm really trying to say is I spend a lot of time thinking about how I want to allocate my time.
Yeah. So when it comes to evaluating an investment, when you're looking at the crypto landscape, what are some type of companies that's out there? Also, I'm curious, as an investment fund, how do you invest in a company like Solana? Does that mean as a fund, you guys purchase a lot of the coins at the initial offering, or is that going to be you invest in the company that is going to create a coin down the line? What does it mean to investing in a company like this?
It's a question that actually has several questions in it. So let me try to break it down. So the first thing is that our investments, as is probably typical with many investment firms in the crypto space, they kind of fall into 3 different buckets. So the first bucket is straight up equity, so to speak. And so that would include, FTX, where we're an equity shareholder. The second bucket would include tokens. And so frequently that's a SAFT, a simple agreement for future tokens. That's a SAFT agreement. So that's your funding, and the contract is that tokens will be issued at a future time, simple agreement for future tokens. So at the TGE token generation event, you will have tokens. And then the third bucket is equity with a token kicker, basically, some kind of hybrid model. So obviously, additionally, for us, we frequently do OTC deals and things like that, purchasing tokens over the counter. But at a high level, you can think of it as three different buckets.
Another question is like when you're looking at these different tokens, you mentioned that like you learn about Solana because of Serum, and Serum is built on Solana. And how do you kind of identify these companies that you want to invest in? Like, what are some characteristics that you would be looking for?
So I think this is something that varies quite considerably for different types of investors. So for Sino, I think you could probably say that we're bottom-up investors. So really it starts with the team, but then there's almost kind of like an overlay, bottom-up with a top-down overlay. So the top-down overlay would consist of various themes that we believe in and that we look for, but we're more bottom up at the same time. So examples of top-down themes that we believe in and view as likely to be true across long time frames. Examples include the fact that really any type of financial market, including, of course, crypto, has a natural process of increasing abstraction and complexity. So this is something that we see in traditional financial markets, and we've seen it with crypto, where first we have spot BTC, and then we have options and futures and things like that. And now we have DeFi, money Legos, et cetera. It's increasing complexity and abstraction over time. So that would be an example of a top-down overlay theme that we have. A second example might be, there's a lot of discussion, obviously, about Metaverse and Web3 these days. So basically, the top-down overlay thesis in that respect is that, and it sounds kind of trite, but I believe it's really a useful framework. We're spending more and more of our time, right, in the digital realm. I mean, I'm an extreme example, of course, but I'm at my computer an embarrassing number of hours per day, and I almost always have multiple electronic devices, frankly, that I'm using at the same time. So we're spending more and more of our time in the digital realm, which we're now starting to think of in a broader sense as the metaverse. So then the question is, what will human behavior look like in that digital realm? And so my basic thinking is that, well, human behavior is not going to change. So it's going to manifest itself in different ways. What might that look like? Well, you look at the different behaviors one by one and assume that they're not going to change. And then what will they look like in the metaverse? So for example, a basic human behavior is that humans like to flex, right? So in the non-metaverse world, we have, I don't know why I'm looking out my window to think of an example, but look, we have, hot cars or whatever, right? So cars don't really do anything for me, but lots of people like their Lambo or their Ferrari and things like that, so they can show off. This behavior is definitely going to manifest itself in the metaverse as well. And I think we're already starting to see that, which is why people are paying millions of dollars for CryptoPunks. So a top-down thesis for metaverse might be to take human behaviors one by one and to think about what those might look like when they are inevitably manifested in the metaverse. So, but we have these top-down overlays. I gave two examples, but fundamentally we're bottom up. And every investor has a different style, but I think that's especially well suited for crypto because the market is so incredibly dynamic that I think if you start to get too specific with a top-down thesis, I think there's a very real chance that you'll start to miss a lot of the opportunities. Great example of that is if we were primarily top-down driven, I don't think anyone was viewing it as a realistic possibility in 2019 that someone was going to be able to go head-to-head with Binance. That seemed like I myself would have viewed that as an outlier possibility. But because we're bottom up, you meet Sam and you're like, this guy's going to kill everybody. And you're much more open-minded to these type of opportunities than if you were trapped in a top-down mindset. Because we're bottom up, we were able to see FTX and what that could become. Obviously, I also didn't think it would be this sensational, but it was very clear that very early to us that something was extraordinarily special at FTX. Necessarily see those things if you're top down, because you're thinking, oh, Binance is so strong. Like, how's somebody gonna come along and knock them off? It's so hard, this and that. You bottom up, you go in, you talk to Sam, you realize that they have this tight knit, amazing culture. You got, geniuses that are sleeping at the office. And you're like, talk about a bet with asymmetric upside. There's a real chance that these guys are just going to knock the cover up.
Yeah. So basically you're saying there's like almost two ways. One way is to look at like what's happening in the current society, and then what is a reflection in the metaverse, and then investing in these like applications.
What we do is basically bottom up with a top down overlay. So we look from a bottom-up standpoint, which means we start with the team and understanding what we have in front of us, and then we think, does this make sense in kind of a greater context?
Yeah. And then you will like look at the team and then see like, what does like a strong team look like? In my VC investing experience, I feel like every single day I would encounter super smart people. By super smart, I mean like they're on paper smart and then they know their industry. They may not be the most experienced people, but they just seem like the rate of thinking always makes sense. But I feel like it's extremely hard to figure who is actually going to make it, especially when the product wasn't exactly standing out as like, because they're so early stage. I'm just curious, like, what is your bar of a smart team?
So a lot of it's pattern matching, but I think that the first thing that's most important to us, and again, this is especially something super important in crypto, is trust. We spend a lot of time, so much time figuring out like, are these people that we trust in a variety of different ways? Do we trust that they're going to be grinders? Is super important, because that's the hardest part and most important part of being an entrepreneur. A lot of people quit 6 months in, or they say, oh, I'll go do something else. So we need to know that this is a person that's going to fight. That's super important. Sam's a genius, but the real secret to his success is sleeping on that beanbag. That's more important than the fact that he's literally one of the smartest people in the world. Is the fact that he, even to this day, sleeps on that beanbag so he can get in that just an extra, half an hour every day of work. He wants it more than other people. Look for attributes like that, first and foremost. Trust across a variety of factors, ethics, but also, do we trust that this is going to be a persistent person?
When you met him, like, so you kind of like cold emailed him and then you flew to
Yeah.
But that's great. Like, so now you guys already kind of like co-GP'd in a different fund, like a $200 million, right? Like, so curious, when you first encountered this person, like, what did you see in this besides the beanbag, of course? And then since they have like 3 people, at what point did you like kind of make the decision you trust this person who is like a hardworking person? Because when you first encounter someone, everyone can fake the first like 2 weeks or something, right?
The key that makes it all work, obviously, is that Sam has a breathtaking intelligence, right? So one thing that was super advantageous to us, Sam being based in Hong Kong at that time, is that, look, in Silicon Valley, we've seen, eccentric genius types, right? Like, we know what that is, kind of, right? So where we see someone that is 10 times smarter than everyone else, and they're just fundamentally different. So they're not going to be throwing on like a $10,000 suit when they meet you or whatever. But look, I mean, at that point, it was a bet with enormous asymmetric upside. And I think, it wasn't just about Sam, it was about the people around him, which again is a credit to Sam. But the point is that it's not a one man show. He's got an extraordinary team, and they're all, mini Sams in some way or another. They, in terms of being enormously talented, enormously hardworking, ethical people, things like that. So for example, the development team for FTX, it's like 5 engineers, or at least it was as of a month or 2 ago. I mean, these are just, talking to him and observing him. These are just extraordinary people. I remember actually when we first visited FTX, the chief developer, he wouldn't even look up to like greet you. He was so focused on his work, which I personally love that. I was like, oh, that's good. That's perfect. I like that. Or the VC, whatever, right? So it just, a lot of it's pattern matching. It felt right.
Do you have any technical background that you could basically look at the code to like figure out what's going on from like a technology standpoint?
I do, in a self-taught way. My studies were kind of at the intersection of computer science, math, and finance. but I'm not expert in any one of those three. But I do in a light touch way, I guess you could say. In an 80-20 kind of way, I do, but not in a world-class way. But of course, you're not going to be able to look at the code for FTX, something like that, when you're investing. That's going to be a black box to you, as it should be.
When it comes to like raising your own fund, I think like in the beginning of 2020 in like March or something, you were on an interview, you introduced like the fund as like a advisory firm.
We started out as sell-side investment bankers, which was the genesis, the starting point of my China career. But when we entered blockchain, we flipped to the buy side.
So the question is just related to like, how do you kind of like raise a crypto focused fund? Because a lot of the listeners are just like young, like VCs, they're like looking at crypto to see what's going on. And then like, how are we going to apply our existing like VC knowledge into this? And then like in the past, people are raising a regular fund. After you have a certain track record, then you build it, right? Like you built your own fund, technically. You go to the same LPs or whatever. And in crypto, it's such a new space. Who do you think is like the top players there? How do you guys raise a fund in crypto? And what are some advantages that you feel like you could add on to the portfolio companies?
In terms of how I raise a crypto fund, I don't. I have Pat and Ian do that. But and the reason is because I want to be spending all my time with portfolio companies. But most of the time, people are not in a position to do that. So in terms of, I think part of your question there at the end was, what are the unique things that we do? And so I think we have a super unique value proposition, which is that if we're on the cap table, we are able to help international best of breed blockchain companies. So we have teams in both China and India that are able to, that are dedicated teams for servicing our portfolio companies in those two enormously important markets. So I think fundamentally, the fact that if we're on your cap table, we can help you in China and India, that's the number one thing that separates us by far and away. Additionally, obviously, we're not we're not Solana maximalists. Sometimes that's a misconception because we do have so many investments in the Solana space. But, again, also we have so many investments in the Solana space and tons of relationships in the Solana ecosystem. So if someone is interested in doing something related to Solana, obviously there's a lot we can add that would, kind of in a second bucket there. The third, we have a number of enormously strategic relationships across vast swaths of the crypto space, famously FTX, but also, for example, Wintermute is a portfolio company, and they are not super famous, but they are low-key one of the most important players in the crypto space as a market maker, as a liquidity provider, as an investor. Multiple hats. So I think the third bucket would be our strategic relationships. But the fourth bucket, obviously, is the fact that if Sino invests in a company, then you can basically assume that company or project, I should say, you can basically assume that project will get a lot of visibility, so they'll get their shot because we are widely followed. So that's something we bring to the table. But then I think what really puts it all together is that we have what I would suggest is an extremely well-deserved reputation for investing in a long-term, deep way, being one of the VCs that is most actively supporting of portfolio companies, doesn't do all these weird 3-month schemes and things like that. We take care of business in really more of a traditional VC way in the crazy world of crypto, which I would argue is the right balance. And also, I think it's super important that we invest in projects that I think of as pro-social.
How many of these like relationships you have to actually build like face-to-face compared to like just over Zoom? I feel like Zoom has been working fine for myself personally. I don't know
But
how.
depends what kind of relationships you're talking about. So for my mainland China relationships, a lot of those need to be in person. For a wide variety of reasons. But in terms of investing and things like that, I've invested in dozens of projects at this point where I've never met people in person. I believe about at least half the Sino team, I've never met them in person.
Out of curiosity, like when you're raising your own like crypto fund, at that point, do you already have a lot of track record, for example, like
Yes.
investing in FTX and stuff
So
like that?
in terms of fundraising specifically, that is to say, one of our advantages is that we started as a prop shop, such that we had, a track record that we could show. And it's a very impressive one. So that's been extremely conducive to being able to close on our first international fund. First institutional fund. So fundraising is, the world is awash with money, but if you're a first-time VC, I'm sure in most circumstances it's quite difficult. For us, it was not, because we had an existing track record to lean on.
I guess like when you were shaping your own team, you mentioned like you never met like half of these teams. Like what kind of talents do you look for in the team? Since like I feel like crypto is such a new industry. Do you just recruit people on Twitter, or like how does that work?
We have. So I do spend a lot of time in the process of shaping the team. And so basically, I think one thing that we did that's been super important for us is we have always done intern to hire. With the exception of myself, everyone at Sino started as an intern. Even our chief general counsel was, came in as an intern with 20 years of experience in the JD. Literally every single person had to start as an intern. And so the purpose of the internship is it's a little bit different than what most people probably think of it as an internship, because you get a lot of responsibility for day one, and it's a 3-month process where people can show what they can bring to the table, and we can see if it's a mutual fit. And having this process, I think, has really been integral to having our little bit of a unique, extremely tight-knit culture. So I think that's one thing that we do that's super important. Another thing is we interview quite a large number of people for each even intern slot. So we really spend quite a lot of time on this. I think one thing that we do really well is it's almost like investing, right? You look for it's easy to just like hire from Harvard MBAs or whatever, but we have people that are that caliber of intelligence, but they're spread out all over the world with unique skills and experience and things like that. And they're all just hungry. They're all studs. They're all animals. They're all working 24/7. We've really created a unique culture here. And I think we've done that by focusing on the right things and not focusing on the wrong things. It doesn't matter, like, things like test scores matter, but it doesn't matter like where you went to school, what you look like. We just focus on the things that are super important. How hungry are you? How smart you are? How much do you really understand our industry, and how ethical you are? And we disregard everything else. So that's, I think, something we've done extraordinarily well.
You mentioned like, they all come from like different backgrounds, and then they're in like different part of the world. Like, what are like some benchmarks that are kind of like proven that they're capable of doing what they're doing while during the internships, right? Like I feel like crypto is such a new industry. I don't even know what's like a good benchmark. As you mentioned, like the degree or whatever probably don't even matter, as it's so new, right?
There's almost no correlation between Stanford, Harvard, or other schools and how much they actually understood. The most important correlation, it's just, have they spent time using the products? Are they obsessed with crypto? That's what's important. If someone, what they focused on in the last year has been getting an A in, linear algebra at Harvard, that's not useful to me, or MIT or wherever. What we need is people that are obsessed about crypto. That's what's most important. And then in terms of benchmarks, we're a hyper entrepreneurial organization. So I think that ends up being a job for each person to find their unique fit and way to contribute on the team. more than almost anything else. It's the opposite of like IBM. I mean, when I'm not hiring for like financial analyst level 3 or whatever, and I need people that are enormously entrepreneurial.
Basically they have made up their own jobs and stuff like that.
Yeah, to a very large extent, that's true. Yeah.
So when you're hiring them, what kind of project do you throw at them? As you mentioned, it's like you create your own job situation. Like, what is the process of like examining someone or like figuring out what you need in your company?
I think it's customized to kind of the specific individual. But what I need is people who can tell me what they can do, and then we can talk about it, and then they can go do it. So I need people that are enormously entrepreneurial and able to do that within a team structure. That's what's most important. So for example, we're making a major push in India. So I need people to understand that that's a strategic imperative for us, and they're able to make a contribution, within that larger framework. I want crypto to take over the world. I want decentralized finance to eat the world. Just like people talked about software eating the world, 15 years ago or 10 years ago or whatever. I think decentralized finance is the most important innovation from an American perspective, using an American timetable, since the internet in the 90s.
So what is like working on your team look like? It sounds like everyone's in different time zone and then like everyone create their own job. And uh I'm just out of curiosity because on LinkedIn I saw like literally you have people in like the UK or like Hong Kong or like basically everywhere. And then there's
Yeah.
like 17 people. And how do you come up with the functions for these people?
Sure. So we have a team sync every day to discuss all the things that everyone's working on and to communicate the top level imperatives. So I think that's enormously important, that once a day everyone is on the call for about an hour and we go through everyone and make sure everyone's on the page that they should be on. And then we have people that work in pairs within our larger structure. So we have a number of different ways of kind of organizing this, but I think every leader has to have a culture, has to instill a team culture that works for them, and a hyper entrepreneurial culture composed of extremely aggressive, independent people is what works for me as a leader.
Going back to like the raising funding, like at what point did you raise your own like crypto fund to fund all the projects like Solana or like Serum? That's like before you guys raised this new fund, right? Like at that point, like what kind of track record did you kind of showcase?
The initial investments that we made it was prop capital, or you could think of it as partner capital, or more directly, my money. So this is the first time we've raised outside money, our new institutional fund.
Did you purchase a lot of crypto at the beginning, like when it started in like 2012 or 2013?
As a hobbyist, I've been in crypto for some time. That's correct. My full-time endeavor until post-Ethereum. When post-Ethereum, it was very evident to me that this was suddenly a much bigger story. In Bitcoin days, I thought this is super cool and I need to keep a close eye on it. And then I started playing with it, kind of as a hobby. But when Ethereum was my moment where I realized this is now a story that is 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 times bigger, and I need to drop everything else and just do this.
I think it's really interesting. And like overall, I feel like how do you kind of come up with how you do things sort of thing?
I'm a very intellectually curious person. So I have a wide variety of intellectual interests. It's kind of like a T-bar thing. So I have all of the breadth, a wide breadth of intellectual interests, and then from among those, I choose different areas where I want to go deep. So it's a T-bar. But I do think that one of the key things that helps me in investing and in business is that I do have an extremely wide top of that T. I have a wide variety of types of knowledge that I can draw from, which enables me to see patterns. Solana is an example of that in the sense that I think it's tremendously important to study and to value history, including the history of technology. So Solana, there are different architecture at a high level as kind of a loose analogy. It reminded me almost I remember thinking, oh, this reminds me of like when we went from single core to dual core to CPUs. So everyone was trying to make the CPUs faster and faster. And we were kind of slowly starting to hit a wall where it's impossible to make a CPU core faster. It was just getting increasingly difficult. And then, so we moved to a new framework, which was to have multiple cores and to have multi-threading. And so Solana's architecture reminded me of going from single threads to multi-threaded CPUs, rather than what everyone else was doing, which seemed more in a very loose analogy. This is an extremely loose analogy, but it seemed like everyone else is trying to make single cores faster. And here we have someone that's trying to have that's saying, well, why not just do multiple cores? So I think I'm an extremely intellectually curious person across a large array of different disciplines, and that really enables me to pattern match. That's one of my core advantages, I think.
What is the metaverse?
It's tough to define something like that, but to me, I think it, I'm sure there are different. I'm sure there's a formal definition and different people's definitions and this, that, and the other. But to me, I think of it as just like, look, where are we spending our time? It's becoming more digital every day. So, metaverse is like your digital life. I think of it just kind of like that. I'm sure there's a much better formal definition, and I'm sure your digital life isn't technically correct in multiple aspects, but I think it's just like a useful framework. Like, look, we're not outside all the time anymore for a variety of reasons. COVID, a million reasons. We're on Zoom, where everything's digital. And so the metaverse is like, look, you got your analog life that's like going outside, going to the park or whatever. And the metaverse, that's your digital life. I kind of just think of it like that.
What is Web3?
I remember thinking, I remember really appreciating and being almost, really overwhelmingly excited about the potential brought by the internet. And it was an enormously optimistic and hopeful innovation. And so ultimately, though, what happened is that the internet ethos and values and way of thinking slowly became corrupted, in my view, and systemically eroded step by step. And so if you ask me what Web3 means to me, it's an opportunity to undo what ultimately happened to the promise of the internet. So right now we have all these entrenched monopolies, and it's all bullshit, right? It's Facebook and ad optimization and all this crap. None of that is what people valued in the early days of the internet. Web3 potentially is an opportunity to push back against these monopolistic data extraction ad optimization machines.
What does that mean to like a regular person? I mean, we hear these buzzwords all the time. Don't know what that means for me besides buy more Ethereum or something. What is like a tangible thing that like a regular person should be doing or like should be looking at right now?
That's a tough question. I think so. I mean, I don't think we're at Web3 is very early. I'm not super sure we're at a point in time where it's going to affect a regular person's life. That we're too early for that. Ultimately, regular people, so to speak, I always think of my mom and sisters as examples because they're both because all three of them are extremely smart, but not highly technical people. That's just not their thing. So my mom and my sisters, I mean, they don't use Web3 now. It's too early for them. Ultimately, they'll use it, but they won't even know that it's Web3, right? It'll be Web3 on the back end or something like that, probably. But I think ultimately we're going to see tremendous innovation coming out of Web3. I mean, that's quite clear to me, but I think we're super early and there are so many question marks.
I'm curious, like when you're looking at your current portfolio, like first of all, like how do you source your deals? And second, like before you have the network, how do you build the network? Is this like on Twitter or like in like a bankless Discord group? Like what does that even mean? Like to like kind of connect with people in like a certain group. And how do you even hear about your top deals? And then number two is like when you think about your portfolio, like what are some categories that you're investing in? Like I saw that it was like certain swaps, like basically like a transaction platforms. That's like a one big bracket. And then like what are some other things that are, I guess, like on top of it, besides like a particular like a cryptocurrency or something?
I think that the most interesting part of that set of questions is about how to source deals. So initially it was very research driven. Because we didn't have the relationship network. So it was a process of trying to research and understand and anticipate things earlier than other people. Because if you're early, then you can get a seat at the table, even if no one knows who the hell you are. So early on, it was extremely research driven. At this point, a lot of our deal flow comes from actually existing portfolio companies, which in my view is the way it should be. We have extremely close relationships with our existing portfolio companies, so they really go to bat for us in a variety of ways because we have done that for them and continue to do that for them. And then I guess the third is relationship, is reputation and continuing to hustle every day. Team reaching out to things that look cool. Hey, let's take a call, things like that. And then, obviously we get a lot of inbound deal flow as well these days through a variety of channels.
The best deals, were they like you approached them or were they like approached you?
Yeah, I think you have to say when in our cycle, in our journey. So early on, the best deals were us approaching them, and we were faster and earlier than to realize the potential than anyone else. That was early on. Now we get a lot of super amazing deals that approach us because now we have a reputation.
Do you collaborate with like other funds? Like what are like some funds that you personally feel like they're great collaborators?
Sure. So we're extremely open to collaboration, just kind of in general for a variety of reasons. First of all, kind of personality and culture. And then secondly, also because fundamentally, in my view, these are still very early days. So it really doesn't make any sense to me at all to think of things in terms of like, dividing up a pie, things like that. Also, of course, because we're very cleanly differentiated from other VCs because of the strategic value we provide in China and India. So we're not direct competitors really with anyone. However, I'm extremely cautious of groupthink and things like that. So we really don't spend a whole lot of time with other VCs. I really want us to be doing our independent analysis and DD and things like that. We don't care who else is on the cap table. We don't, none of that stuff matters to me. We want to have our own vision. I'd much rather be spending time with developers after, of course, our beloved portfolio companies. I'd much rather be spending all our time with developers and power users and such rather than other VCs. I don't really care what other VCs think or do.
When it comes to like investing, like is that the same as like investing in like a regular venture deal, like besides you're using cryptocurrency, or what is the similarity and differences? Because I never invested in like an actual crypto company, like beside like purchasing a particular currency or something.
So of course, these are liquid assets. Frequently, we talked earlier about the three buckets, but if you were to take just the token bucket, so frequently you'll do the SAFT, and there'll be a token generation event. And frequently there'll be some kind of lockup and the tokens will be gradually unlocked. There'll be some liquidity across different stages, things like that. And so that's fundamentally different than a TradFi VC model where you have to exit through IPO or through a company being acquired. So with that said, for Sino, because we're long-term investors, a lot of that stuff doesn't really matter to us. I don't really care, if a third of the tokens are unlocked after, a year or this, that, or the other. None of that really matters to me. Because our default path is that we're long-term investors. In a scenario where we would be exiting after a year or 2 years or something like that, to me, that means that something would have had to have gone very wrong, at the portfolio company in some way. So for us, it's probably less of a difference between TradFi and crypto in terms of VC model than most investors, because of our long-term model commitment style. But certainly for people that take a different approach, the fact that these are liquid assets is a very significant difference.
After you started this new fund with FTX, what are something different that you guys will do together compared to your current fund?
The short answer is nothing. The point of the fund is to continue in the Sino style. FTX is a co-GP and a very significant LP. In a manner of speaking, they are kind of a silent partner in this endeavor. It's continuing in the Sino style. So the impetus to have an institutional fund was so we could continue with so our prop investments could continue to ripen. In other words, there's no point from my perspective in recycling Solana. I don't want to sell Solana, I want to keep it. So that's one of the main points in terms of why we raised this fund. The second also was to be able to continue to do cool with FTX together. It was kind of a natural next step. And then the third is to be able to add international stakeholders in the form of LPs, of course, but international stakeholders all over the world to be able to kind of make new friends in that regard. But ultimately, in terms of investment style and things like that, it's a continuation of the Sino style.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Matthew, for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you enjoyed today's episode, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out. Have a wonderful day.